Picture this. You wake up one morning to find a 6-foot deep trench carved around your entire property like a prison moat, and your HOA president is standing there with a shovel smiling. That's exactly what happened to me. I walked outside for my morning coffee and found myself literally trapped on my own land. No way to get my truck out, no way for emergency vehicles to reach me. Just me, my house, and a massive dirt barrier that appeared overnight like some psychotic landscaping project. The smell of diesel exhaust hung in the morning air as construction workers fled the scene. But here's what really made my blood boil. There was Bethany Cromwell, our neighborhood's self-appointed queen, directing this whole operation at dawn like she owned the place. Too bad for her. My security cameras caught every shovelful. What would you do if you woke up trapped on your own property? And where are you watching from? Please tell me your HOA isn't this completely unhinged. Let me back up and tell you how this nightmare started. My name's Marcus Whitfield, and 6 months ago, I thought I'd escaped to paradise. After 22 years as an Army electrician and a divorce that left me broke and broken, I inherited my grandmother's place in Pinedale, Colorado. 2 acres of mountain sanctuary with a 1940s farmhouse that still held the ghost of her cinnamon rolls. Every morning, I'd sit on that wraparound porch with my coffee, listening to pine needles crunch under deer hooves and breathing air so pure it made Phoenix feel like sucking exhaust fumes. The scent of pine sap and morning frost reminded me why my grandmother never left this place. She'd built something permanent here, something real. I should have known it was too good to last. Enter Bethany Cromwell, 45 years old, armed with a real estate license and the personality of a piranha in a Prada suit. Picture your worst nightmare HOA president, then multiply by 10. She drove a white BMW SUV with custom Prius B plates and carried herself like she'd personally invented mountain living. Bethany had moved to Pinedale just 3 years ago, but acted like she'd founded the damn town. The sound of her designer heels clicking across my wooden porch became the soundtrack to my personal hell. She controlled our 4-person HOA board through pure intimidation, turning neighborhood meetings into her personal courtroom. I watched her reduce a 70-year-old retiree to tears over a mailbox that was supposedly 3 inches too tall. That should have been my warning. The first violation notice appeared on my door like a death sentence. Non-conforming structures must be removed within 30 days. They wanted me to demolish my grandmother's chicken coop and tool shed, buildings that had weathered 40 Colorado winters while Bethany was probably still in diapers. The fine? $150 per day, starting immediately. I laughed at first. Had to be a mistake, right? Wrong. The weekly inspections started immediately. Bethany would arrive unannounced with her measuring tape and camera, documenting everything from my work truck in my own driveway to individual blades of grass she deemed excessive. Her cloying perfume would hang in the mountain air for hours after each visit, like she was marking territory. Then came the anonymous complaints. Noise violations filed when I used power tools at noon on weekdays. Reports of suspicious activity when neighbors stopped by for help with electrical problems. One complaint claimed my grandmother's 40-year-old oak tree was a visual obstruction that lowered property values. But here's what made my blood truly boil. I wasn't her only target. She was systematically terrorizing every original family in our 47-home development. Harold next door got violation notices for his wife's memorial garden. Sarah Chen faced $500 monthly fines for her kid's swing set. 3 families had already sold and fled rather than fight her legal warfare. I spent my first weekend researching county codes at the courthouse, surrounded by the musty smell of old records and growing fury. Every single one of my grandmother's structures was completely legal, grandfathered in decades before any HOA existed. I sent Bethany a certified letter with copies of all the documentation. She responded by doubling my fines. That's when I started digging into the HOA's formation documents. Army intelligence training dies hard, and something about Bethany's paperwork stunk worse than week-old fish. Sure enough, the property boundaries in her incorporation filing were wrong, off by 50 feet in multiple places. More importantly, according to my grandmother's original deed and every county survey, my land had never legally been included in any HOA jurisdiction. Bethany had been collecting fines for property she had zero authority over. My second certified letter explaining this inconvenient legal fact got the same response as the first. Complete silence, followed by escalation. That's when I realized this wasn't about neighborhood standards or property values. This was about control, intimidation, and systematic theft disguised as civic duty. Bethany Cromwell wanted a war? Fine. But she'd just declared hostilities against the wrong veteran. Time to show her what 22 years of military problem-solving looked like. 2 weeks after my second ignored letter, Bethany escalated to nuclear warfare. I came home from a job site to find a county code enforcement officer standing in my driveway, clipboard in hand, and a grim expression that told me everything I needed to know. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm here about complaints regarding an illegal auto repair business operating on this property." I stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Auto repair business? I'm an electrician." He showed me the complaint form, complete with photographs that made my workshop look like some kind of chop shop operation. The pictures showed multiple vehicles in my driveway, tools scattered around, and what appeared to be commercial-level automotive work in progress. Never mind that the multiple vehicles were actually my neighbor Harold's truck and Sarah Chen's minivan, both getting simple electrical repairs as neighborly favors. The photos were clever, I'll give Bethany that. Taken from angles that made my legitimate electrical work look suspicious, cropped to hide context, and time-stamped during the exact moment my daughter was visiting with her boyfriend's pickup truck. She'd turned 3 neighbors helping each other into evidence of criminal enterprise. "Ma'am," I told the inspector, "I've been helping neighbors with electrical problems, not running a business. These photos are deliberately misleading." He looked sympathetic, but shrugged. "I have to follow up on all complaints, sir. Mind if I take a look around?" 20 minutes later, he admitted there was obviously no auto repair business, but the damage was done. Bethany had established a pattern of suspicious commercial activity in the county records. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I drove to the electronics store and bought 8 security cameras with cloud storage and motion alerts. If Bethany wanted to play photography games, I'd give her a taste of high-definition reality. The installation took me 3 days of careful wiring and positioning. I made sure every inch of my property line was covered, with special attention to areas where previous inspections had occurred. The cameras were professional grade, night vision capable, and completely legal since they only monitored my own property. The first payoff came within a week. My phone buzzed with a motion alert at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I rolled over in bed and opened the app, expecting to see a deer or maybe Harold walking his dog early. Instead, I watched Bethany Cromwell creeping around my backyard in the pre-dawn darkness, photographing my workshop windows with a telephoto lens. The audio was crystal clear. If I can get pictures of electrical equipment, I can claim he's running unlicensed contracting work. I had her. Dead to rights, trespassing on my property while plotting her next false complaint. But instead of confronting her immediately, I decided to let her dig her own grave deeper. Over the next month, my cameras captured a symphony of harassment. Bethany appeared on my property 14 separate times, always before sunrise or after dark. She measured my fence posts, photographed my electrical meter, and even collected samples of soil from my garden, presumably looking for evidence of environmental violations. The diesel smell that started lingering around my property finally made sense when I caught her boyfriend's excavation company surveying my property lines with professional equipment. The cameras showed them taking measurements, driving stakes, and having heated discussions about easement access and utility corridors. But the real breakthrough came when I started researching property records at the county courthouse. Harold mentioned in passing that the previous owner of my house had sold for $40,000 below market value just 2 years ago, claiming he couldn't handle the stress anymore. The records told a story that made my stomach turn. Same pattern: violation notices, fines, harassment campaigns, and eventually a forced sale. The buyer? Cromwell Properties LLC, Bethany's real estate company. She'd done this before, multiple times. I spent that weekend digging through every property transfer in our development over the past 3 years. 6 houses had sold below market value after extended disputes with the HOA. All 6 had been purchased directly or indirectly by companies connected to Bethany or her husband. This wasn't about neighborhood standards. This was about systematic property theft disguised as community improvement. My cameras had caught her trespassing. My research had revealed her pattern, but I needed more evidence before making my move. That's when I called Harold and asked him to come over for coffee. Time to find out if my neighbors were ready to fight back. Harold, I said, showing him the security footage on my laptop. How long has Bethany been terrorizing this neighborhood? His weathered hands shook slightly as he watched Bethany skulking around my property in the darkness. Since the day she moved in, son. Since the very first day. The war was no longer just about my property. It was about saving our entire community from a predator in designer clothing. Harold's revelation opened the floodgates. Over the next 3 days, I learned the true scope of Bethany's operation, and it was worse than anything I'd imagined. She destroyed Margaret's memorial garden, Harold said, his voice cracking as we sat in my kitchen. The scent of my grandmother's lavender sachets still lingered in the drawers nearby, a sharp contrast to the poison we were discussing. 30 years my wife spent cultivating those roses. Bethany claimed they violated uniform landscaping standards and had them ripped out while I was buying groceries. But Bethany wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. The emergency injunction arrived like a lightning bolt at 6 a.m. Thursday, served by a sheriff's deputy who looked apologetic but determined. According to the court papers, I was now prohibited from conducting any electrical work on my property for 30 days due to fire hazard concerns raised by multiple concerned neighbors. The hearing had been held the previous afternoon, without my knowledge or presence. Bethany had presented 3 expert witnesses, all lawyers from her husband's firm, who testified that my electrical work posed imminent danger to the entire neighborhood. She'd even provided signed statements from neighbors expressing fear for their safety, but I recognized exactly 0 of the signatures. The immediate impact was devastating. $8,000 in scheduled electrical jobs, gone. My kitchen renovation sat half-finished, exposed wires dangling like broken promises. Meanwhile, Bethany celebrated her legal victory by spreading rumors that painted me as an unstable veteran threatening innocent families. That cloying perfume of hers seemed to follow me everywhere in town now, marking her expanding territory of influence. That's when I made the smartest decision of this entire war. I hired Diane Kozlowski, a retired sheriff's detective who'd seen every dirty trick in the book. My army training had taught me that when facing superior forces, you bring in specialists. Diane's first discovery made my stomach drop. "Your HOA president has been very busy," she said, spreading financial records across my dining room table like crime scene photos. Cromwell Properties bought 6 homes in this development over 2 years, all 15 to 30% below market value. The pattern was surgical. Bethany would target original families with harassment campaigns, generate crushing legal costs through fraudulent complaints, then force desperate sales at discount prices. Her company would flip these properties to wealthy newcomers at full market value. $300,000 in commissions from forced sales, Diane continued, her finger tracing the money trail, not counting flip profits. But the corruption network went deeper than real estate fraud. I'd read about municipal corruption in military intelligence briefings, but seeing it firsthand was different. The county inspector investigating my auto repair business, Bethany's college roommate, the judge who'd granted that emergency restraining order without notifying me, golf buddies with Bethany's husband, the city councilman fast-tracking her complaints, her brother-in-law. This wasn't neighborhood harassment. It was organized crime wearing a municipal badge. Bethany escalated by demanding I remove all security cameras within 48 hours, claiming they violated privacy rights. The irony burned like acid. When I refused, she threatened another lawsuit for stalking and harassment. Her boyfriend's construction crew started daily boundary surveys at dawn, hydraulic machinery whining like tortured metal, drowning out the peaceful mountain mornings I'd moved here to find. They'd block my driveway with equipment, claiming emergency repairs to HOA common areas that somehow always happened exactly where I needed to drive. But Bethany made a fatal mistake in her desperation. She filed a lawsuit demanding $100,000 for emotional distress from being constantly surveilled. Here's where my research into HOA law paid off. Something I'd learned during those long nights studying property rights after my first violation notice. Her own HOA bylaws specifically authorized security cameras for community protection. I had copies of emails where Bethany personally approved camera installations for 3 neighborhood allies. Her privacy lawsuit directly contradicted her own association's rules. In legal terms, that's called selective enforcement, and it opens the door to discrimination claims that can destroy an entire HOA structure. Diane captured perfect evidence of this hypocrisy. Security footage of Bethany helping install cameras at her best friend's house just 2 weeks before demanding I remove mine. But the real breakthrough came when Diane's surveillance caught audio gold during a late-night conversation in Bethany's driveway. The mountain air carries sound differently than city noise, cleaner, sharper, with nowhere for secrets to hide. Once we eliminate these stubborn old families, we'll control the mineral rights to the entire development. Mineral rights. That phrase hit me like a sniper's bullet to the chest. This wasn't about neighborhood standards or property values. Bethany was systematically stealing land that potentially contained millions of dollars in natural gas deposits. Every forced sale consolidated more mineral rights under her control. My grandmother's 2 acres weren't just my inheritance. They were sitting on a fortune that Bethany would kill for. The morning I discovered the trench will haunt me forever. I'd fallen asleep reviewing mineral rights documents until 2 a.m. So when my phone started buzzing with motion alerts at dawn, I figured it was just deer crossing the property line. I was wrong. Dead wrong. I stumbled onto my porch with coffee in hand and stopped cold. A 6-foot-deep moat carved around my entire property perimeter, fresh earth piled high like fortress walls. Heavy machinery still rumbling in the distance, yellow hard hats scrambling to pack equipment into trucks marked Cromwell Excavation, LLC. The smell hit me next. Diesel exhaust mixed with churned earth and something else. Fear. My own fear, because I suddenly understood what being truly trapped felt like. My security cameras had captured the whole operation. 5 hours of footage showing Bethany directing an excavation crew like some deranged battlefield commander, wearing a designer hard hat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The audio was crystal clear in the thin mountain air. Make sure it's deep enough that he can't drive out. That should teach him to mess with us. I grabbed my phone and called 911. "Sir, we'll send someone out," the dispatcher said, "but if it's a property dispute, you'll need to contact civil authorities." 20 minutes later, Fire Chief Morrison arrived and delivered the knockout punch. "Mr. Whitfield, your property is now inaccessible for emergency vehicles. Until this is resolved, we can't guarantee response times." Before I could process that devastating news, a county inspector arrived, the same one who'd investigated my auto repair business. This time, he was demanding I fill the trench immediately at my own expense, claiming it violated county safety codes. "But I didn't dig it," I protested, showing him the security footage on my phone. He shrugged with practiced indifference. "Property owner is responsible for all excavations on their land, regardless of who did the work." The trap was perfect. Bethany had vandalized my property, then used county regulations to force me to pay for repairs. My grandmother had always said the mountains taught you who your real enemies were. She just never mentioned they might wear badges. By noon, local news trucks were arriving. Channel 7's Jenny Morrison knocked on my door with a camera crew, having heard about the neighborhood dispute on police scanners. "Mr. Whitfield, can you tell us what happened here?" I gave her the full story, complete with security footage and financial records Diane had uncovered. But when the story aired that evening, the headline read, "Neighborhood Dispute Turns Dangerous." They'd somehow painted me as an unstable hermit fighting progress, while Bethany appeared as a concerned community leader trying to maintain safety standards. The media manipulation stung, but Harold's courage gave me hope. That evening, he knocked on my door with a manila envelope thick as a phone book. "I've been documenting everything," he said, his weathered hands steady as granite. "Every violation notice, every threatening letter, every time they trespassed. 3 years of evidence, son." Sarah Chen appeared 20 minutes later with her own folder. "Forged HOA signatures," she said quietly, glancing around like Bethany might materialize from the shadows. "I'm a bank fraud investigator. I know fake signatures when I see them." As we spread documents across my kitchen table, the scope of Bethany's criminal enterprise became clear. She'd been systematically forging property owner signatures on HOA documents since day one. Every vote, every fee assessment, every rule change, all based on fraudulent paperwork. From my military intelligence days, I remembered that document fraud was federal jurisdiction, mail fraud specifically, when those forged papers went through the postal system. The FBI doesn't mess around with organized schemes involving government agencies. But Bethany wasn't finished. The next morning brought a new horror. Crews from her boyfriend's company had returned overnight for utility line inspections. They'd severed my internet cables, claiming the lines violated county easement regulations. My phone service mysteriously went dead an hour later. The isolation was psychological warfare, cut off from communication, trapped behind an earthen wall. Watching construction crews prowl my property line like predators. That sharp ozone smell from severed cables mixed with diesel exhaust created an atmosphere of technological violence. I climbed up onto my roof to get cell service and called Diane. "They're accelerating the timeline," I told her. "Something big is coming." She'd been tracking property records all night. "Marcus, you need to see this. Bethany's real estate company already has your house listed online as coming soon. Spectacular mountain views. The listing went live yesterday." Yesterday. Before the trench was even dug. They weren't just harassing me into leaving. They were already selling my inheritance out from under me. That afternoon, I noticed survey stakes appearing throughout the neighborhood. Not just on my property, but on Harold's land, Sarah's yard, even around the community areas. Bethany's excavation crews were marking every original family's property for boundary clarification. The trench around my house wasn't punishment. It was a preview. A demonstration of what would happen to anyone who continued resisting her land grab operation. As sunset painted the mountains blood red, I made a decision that would change everything. This war was no longer about my property rights or even my grandmother's legacy. Bethany was coming for every original family in this development, and someone had to make a stand. Time to stop playing defense and start fighting back. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. while I was digging through boxes of my grandmother's papers in the basement, desperate for anything that might save our community. The musty smell of old documents mixed with my growing desperation as I searched through decades of property records by flashlight. My power had been mysteriously disconnected for safety inspection that afternoon. Then I found it. A manila envelope marked HOA Incorporation, important, in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Inside were the original state filing documents for our homeowners association, and my blood turned to ice water. Bethany had claimed unanimous consent from all property owners when incorporating the HOA. The signature page showed every landowner's name with what appeared to be their written approval. But my grandmother's signature was wrong, completely wrong. I'd seen Eleanor Whitfield's handwriting thousands of times, careful, precise, with a distinctive loop on the W and a flourish on the E. The signature on this document was crude, rushed, obviously forged. Someone had tried to copy her name from another document and failed miserably. My hands shook as I compared it to her real signature on a birthday card she'd sent me just months before her death. The difference was night and day. If Bethany had forged my grandmother's signature, what about the others? I called Harold at dawn. "I need you to look at something immediately." 20 minutes later, he was sitting at my kitchen table staring at the incorporation documents with growing fury. "That's not Margaret's signature either," he said, pointing to his deceased wife's name. "She never wrote the M like that. Always had a little hook at the bottom from her arthritis." Sarah Chen arrived within the hour, took one look at her own signature, and laughed bitterly. "I was living in California when this was supposedly signed. I didn't even move here until 2 years later." The scope of the fraud was staggering. Bethany had forged at least 8 signatures to create a legal fiction, that our properties had voluntarily joined her HOA. In reality, she'd manufactured consent through systematic document forgery. From my research into property law during those sleepless nights, I knew this was more than simple fraud. When someone uses forged documents to claim authority over real estate, it triggers multiple federal crimes: mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and potentially racketeering. The kind of charges that destroy lives and send people to federal prison for decades. But Diane's investigation had uncovered something even bigger. Those mineral rights Bethany had mentioned weren't just theoretical. A 2019 geological survey had confirmed significant natural gas deposits under our entire development. The energy company's preliminary agreement was worth $12 million for full extraction rights. "She's not just stealing houses," Diane explained, spreading geological maps across my table. "She's consolidating mineral rights that could make her filthy rich. Every forced sale gives her control over another piece of a multi-million-dollar puzzle." The master plan was breathtakingly criminal. Force out original families at below-market prices, consolidate their mineral rights, then sell extraction permits to energy companies for massive profits. The new wealthy residents would get pristine mountain views while Bethany got millionaire status. My grandmother's 2 acres weren't just sentimental value. They contained mineral rights potentially worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Rights that Bethany planned to steal through forged documents and systematic harassment. Harold's voice broke as he realized the full scope. She's not just taking our homes, son. She's erasing our family's entire legacy for profit. But we had advantages Bethany didn't know about. Sarah's background in bank fraud investigation gave us expertise in document analysis. Harold's meticulous record-keeping had created a paper trail of harassment spanning 3 years. My security system had captured months of criminal activity. Most importantly, we now had evidence of federal crimes that would bring agencies with real power into our fight. The FBI doesn't negotiate with small-town corruption. They dismantle it. As morning sunlight finally penetrated my basement window, I realized we weren't just fighting for our properties anymore. We were sitting on evidence that could destroy an entire criminal enterprise disguised as community leadership. Time to take this war to a level Bethany Cromwell never saw coming. The next 72 hours felt like organizing a military operation, which in many ways, it was. My grandmother's kitchen became our command center, her old wooden table buried under evidence folders, legal documents, and enough coffee cups to fuel a small army. Harold's grandson Jake arrived first, the pro bono attorney I'd heard about but never met, 35 years old with the kind of sharp intelligence that came from handling property rights cases across 3 states. He spread out copies of Bethany's forged documents like crime scene photos. "This is federal territory now," he said, studying the signature analysis reports. "Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud multiple government agencies. We're talking 20-year prison sentences if we can prove systematic intent." The smell of fresh ink filled the room as we printed hundreds of pages of evidence. Every security camera recording, every financial transaction, every forged signature blown up to poster size. Jake had a prosecutor's eye for detail, organizing everything into a chronological timeline that told the story of organized crime masquerading as community management. "Here's what most people don't understand about property fraud," Jake explained while reviewing mineral rights documents. "When someone uses forged paperwork to claim authority over real estate, every action they take afterward becomes part of the conspiracy. Every fine, every violation notice, every forced sale builds the federal case stronger." Sarah's husband Tom arrived from Denver with a truck full of investigative journalism equipment. As a Denver Post reporter, he'd covered municipal corruption before, but nothing quite like this scope. "This isn't just local news," he said, setting up cameras and recording equipment. "This is a story about systematic theft disguised as civic duty." Diane coordinated with federal agencies while we worked. The FBI had opened a mail fraud investigation based on those forged HOA documents. The state attorney general's office assigned a prosecutor to the real estate fraud case. Environmental crimes investigators wanted to pursue the unpermitted excavation charges. "The beautiful thing about federal crimes," Diane explained, "is that local corruption can't protect you. When FBI agents show up with warrants, golf buddies, and college roommates suddenly develop amnesia about their helpful relationships." We spent hours organizing evidence into multimedia presentations, security footage compiled into a devastating chronological timeline, financial records showing the money trail from forced sales directly into Bethany's accounts. Expert handwriting analysis proving systematic forgery across multiple legal documents. Harold contributed something invaluable. 3 years of detailed documentation in careful handwriting, every harassment incident recorded with dates, times, and witnesses. His military background had taught him the same lesson mine had. When fighting superior forces, documentation becomes your strongest weapon. "My Margaret always said to write everything down," he said, voice thick with emotion. She knew bullies rely on people forgetting exactly what happened. Sarah brought banking expertise that turned financial records into clear evidence of fraud. "Look at the timing," she said, pointing to deposit records. "Every forced sale generates a commission payment within 48 hours. That's not coincidence, that's systematic profiteering from harassment campaigns." The community mobilization surprised everyone. Word had spread through social media about our Thursday town hall meeting, and RSVPs were pouring in from across the county. 23 families confirmed attendance to share similar harassment stories. 3 other neighborhoods reported identical patterns involving Bethany's real estate company. Tom's media contacts were building a story that would reach statewide audiences. Channel 7's Jenny Morrison had reviewed our evidence and committed to live broadcast coverage from the town hall. The Denver Post was preparing an expose on municipal corruption in mountain communities. Jake prepared criminal referral packages for multiple agencies. We're not just seeking civil remedies, he explained. We're documenting federal crimes that require prosecution. Bethany and her co-conspirators need to face real consequences. The technical preparation was exhaustive. Professional surveyors confirmed the trench placement was entirely on my property, violating multiple county ordinances. Environmental engineers documented unpermitted earth disturbance across several properties. Banking experts traced illegal HOA fee collections through forged authorizations. My security system had become the prosecution's star witness. Months of footage showing systematic trespassing, property destruction, and harassment campaigns. Audio recordings of criminal conspiracy discussions. Digital timestamps that correlated perfectly with financial fraud patterns. But Bethany's desperation was escalating. Diane's surveillance had caught her attempting to flee the state after one final property acquisition. Her husband was transferring assets to offshore accounts. Emergency court orders had frozen their finances, but they were clearly preparing for the worst. The beautiful irony, Jake said, reviewing the evidence timeline, is that every escalation she's attempted has created more federal evidence. The trench, the utility sabotage, the media manipulation, it all builds the conspiracy case stronger. As we prepared for Thursday's confrontation, the emotional stakes became clear. This wasn't just about property rights or even criminal justice. We were fighting to preserve the character of a community that predated Bethany's arrival by decades. Harold was defending his wife's memorial garden and 40 years of mountain memories. Sarah was protecting her children's right to safe neighborhood play. I was honoring my grandmother's legacy and every veteran's right to peaceful retirement. The evidence was overwhelming. The legal strategy was bulletproof. The community support was unprecedented. Time to show Bethany Cromwell what happened when criminals targeted the wrong neighborhood. Bethany's final week of desperation began with sirens wailing through the mountain morning air, a sound that still makes my coffee cup rattle when I hear it unexpectedly. The sheriff's deputy who knocked on my door at 6 a.m. looked genuinely apologetic as he handed me an arrest warrant. "Mr. Whitfield, you're being charged with assault with a deadly weapon and terroristic threatening." I stared at the legal document like it was written in ancient hieroglyphics. "Assault? On who?" "Bethany Cromwell claims you threatened her with a shovel during a property inspection yesterday afternoon, when I'd been 50 miles away buying electrical supplies in Denver. The receipt was still crumpled in my truck's cup holder, time-stamped at exactly the moment Bethany claimed I was menacing her with garden tools. But the trap was more sophisticated than simple false accusations. Bethany's husband had recused himself from the case, too obvious a conflict of interest, and assigned it to Judge Patricia Manning, his regular golf partner and poker buddy. Emergency hearing scheduled for Thursday morning, the exact same day as our town hall meeting. The message was crystal clear: spend Thursday in court fighting fabricated charges or face potential jail time that would silence my testimony forever. "She's brilliant. I'll give her that," Jake said after reviewing the charges. "Assault with a deadly weapon carries mandatory detention pending trial. Even if we prove it's fabricated, you could be locked up for weeks." Bethany had provided witness statements from her construction crew, all swearing they'd seen me wielding a shovel aggressively during her routine inspection. The paperwork looked official, detailed, and completely manufactured. But security cameras don't lie, and mine had captured something even better than my absence. They'd recorded Bethany's crew rehearsing their false testimony in my driveway the night before, discussing exactly what lies to tell police. "Make sure you say he raised the shovel like he was going to hit her," one worker coached another, "and mention his military background. Make him sound dangerous." The assault charges dissolved faster than sugar in hot coffee once Jake presented the contradictory evidence. But Bethany escalated immediately to community-wide intimidation. Anonymous threats appeared on Harold's doorstep that same afternoon. "Keep quiet Thursday or face consequences." Sarah Chen called me panicking. Unknown vehicles had followed her children home from school, circling their bus stop like predators stalking prey. 3 more families received fake code enforcement violations requiring immediate compliance with impossible deadlines. The psychological warfare was designed to fracture our alliance before the town hall confrontation. But the most sinister escalation came at midnight, when my motion sensors triggered repeatedly around the property perimeter. I watched through security cameras as Bethany's boyfriend crept through my grandmother's vegetable garden with a backpack sprayer, methodically poisoning every plant with industrial herbicide. The next morning, I found my inheritance garden dying. Tomato plants my grandmother had cultivated from seeds her own mother brought from Ireland, wilting black as cancer spread through their leaves. The acrid chemical smell burned my nostrils and probably my lungs, but the emotional damage cut deeper than any physical harm. Diane's connections with agricultural crime investigators identified the poison: commercial-grade glyphosate mixed with industrial defoliant, illegal for residential use and toxic enough to sterilize soil for decades. This wasn't vandalism. It was environmental terrorism designed to destroy my family's agricultural legacy permanently. Audio surveillance captured Bethany ordering the destruction. "Make sure nothing grows there ever again. I want that garden dead as a cemetery." Her desperation had reached psychotic levels, but she wasn't finished. That afternoon, while I was documenting the garden poisoning for police reports, she planted fake methamphetamine evidence near my workshop and called in an anonymous drug tip. "Chemical smells coming from that property," the caller reported. "Looks like some kind of drug lab operation." The DEA raid that followed was professionally humiliating and personally devastating. Agents swarmed my property like I was running a cartel operation, only to discover that Bethany's methamphetamine was actually baking soda mixed with cleaning supplies. The lead agent apologized profusely after lab analysis revealed the planted evidence, but the damage was done. Local news had filmed the entire raid, and Bethany's media allies spun it as investigation into dangerous criminal activity before the truth emerged. "She's unraveling," Diane observed after reviewing surveillance footage. "When criminals get this desperate, they make mistakes that destroy themselves." The biggest mistake came that evening when Bethany thought she was having a private conversation with her husband in their driveway. Mountain air carries sound differently than city noise, cleaner, sharper, with nowhere for secrets to hide. "Once we get rid of these old families, we'll control $3 million in mineral rights," her voice carried perfectly to my hidden audio equipment. "The energy company deal goes through next month. Then we relocate to Costa Rica with enough money to disappear forever." She'd confessed to the entire criminal conspiracy on tape, including plans to flee prosecution once the last original families were eliminated. Thursday's town hall meeting wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about stopping a criminal enterprise before they destroyed more lives and disappeared with millions in stolen assets. The war was almost over. Time for the final battle. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of mountain clarity that makes you believe justice is possible, but Bethany had one final card to play that nearly broke me completely. I woke to the rumbling of diesel engines surrounding my property like mechanized wolves. Bethany had positioned construction equipment to create an impenetrable blockade around my driveway, claiming emergency water line repair that would require 48 hours of access restriction. The timing was surgical. I was trapped on my own property, unable to attend the town hall meeting where 3 months of evidence would finally expose her criminal empire. "Mr. Whitfield," the crew foreman said with practiced indifference, "county regulations require us to maintain work zone security until repairs are complete. Emergency water line repair, on the morning of my vindication." The coincidence was so obvious it would have been funny if my future wasn't hanging in the balance. But Bethany had underestimated the community she'd spent 3 years terrorizing. Harold arrived at 8 a.m. leading a convoy of 30 pickup trucks filled with neighbors I'd never spoken to before. Sarah Chen had organized a social media campaign that brought families from across the county. Even people who'd never experienced HOA harassment understood that what happened to me could happen to anyone. "Nobody traps a veteran on his own land," Harold announced, his weathered voice carrying the authority of someone who'd defended democracy in 2 wars. "Move that equipment, or we'll move it for you." The standoff lasted 20 minutes before county sheriff deputies arrived and determined that Bethany's emergency repair was actually unlawful obstruction of property access. The construction crew disappeared faster than mountain fog at sunrise. Meanwhile, Bethany was orchestrating her own counter-demonstration. She'd hired supporters from other HOA developments, $200 each to attend and paint me as a dangerous extremist threatening peaceful communities. Her hired crowd carried professionally printed signs reading, "Stop veteran violence and protect our families." The media manipulation was sophisticated but transparent. Local news crews filming her supporters didn't realize they were documenting paid political theater designed to discredit legitimate harassment victims. Tom's investigative journalism contacts had uncovered the payment records for Bethany's fake grassroots movement. Bank transfers showing exactly $200 paid to each concerned neighbor created evidence of fraud that would strengthen federal conspiracy charges. The drive to town hall felt like riding into battle, which in many ways it was. Jenny Morrison from Channel 7 had arranged helicopter coverage that filmed my journey from trapped property owner to community defender. The aerial footage of that earthen trench around my house would become the defining image of systematic property harassment. Bethany's final legal maneuver was attempting to suppress all security camera evidence through emergency court order. She claimed my cameras violated federal wiretapping laws and demanded sealed proceedings to protect trade secrets about mineral rights development. But Jake had anticipated this desperate move. "Your Honor," he told Judge Manning during the emergency hearing, "plaintiff seeks to suppress evidence of her own criminal activity under pretense of privacy protection. This court lacks jurisdiction over federal wiretapping charges, and plaintiff provides no legal basis for sealing proceedings about public mineral rights." The judge's golf relationship with Bethany's husband suddenly seemed less important when federal agencies were watching every decision for signs of corruption. By 6 p.m., the high school auditorium was packed beyond capacity, 280 people in a space designed for 200, with overflow crowds listening through outdoor speakers. 3 television news crews had set up for live broadcast coverage. FBI agents and state prosecutors sat in the front row like judicial executioners. Bethany arrived with private security and a public relations handler, still believing she could spin this disaster into victimhood. Her designer outfit and professional entourage contrasted sharply with the working families she'd spent years terrorizing. The murmur of anticipation fell silent as I entered to spontaneous applause. Mountain communities understand the difference between authentic neighbors and predatory outsiders, and tonight that understanding would determine Bethany's fate. But her most revealing moment came during setup, when she thought the microphones weren't active yet. Audio technicians had already begun recording, capturing her conversation with the PR handler about damage control strategies and exit planning. "If this goes badly, we implement the Costa Rica contingency immediately," Bethany's voice carried through the auditorium speakers. "The offshore accounts are already established." She'd confessed to flight risk and hidden assets before the formal proceedings even began. Every law enforcement officer in the room suddenly paid closer attention to her every movement. The evidence presentation was ready. The community support was overwhelming. The media coverage would reach hundreds of thousands of viewers. Harold squeezed my shoulder as we took our seats. "Your grandmother would be proud, son. Eleanor never backed down from bullies either." Sarah Chen's children had made hand-drawn signs reading "Save Our Neighborhood" and "Heroes Live Here." Even 8-year-olds understood that sometimes adults must fight to protect what's right. The final battle was about to begin, and Bethany Cromwell had no idea how completely she'd already lost. The packed auditorium felt like a courtroom where justice had finally arrived to a forgotten corner of America. 280 people crammed into seats designed for 200, with another 50 listening through speakers outside. The air hummed with 3 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. County Commissioner Rodriguez called the meeting to order, but everyone's eyes were on the front row where FBI agent Patricia Henley and state prosecutor Michael Chang sat like silent judges. Behind them, Jenny Morrison's Channel 7 crew prepared for live broadcast that would reach 340,000 viewers across Colorado. Bethany entered like a politician at a hostile rally, flanked by private security and a crisis management specialist who probably charged more per hour than most people earned in a week. Her designer outfit and professional entourage seemed calculated to reinforce her image as a successful businesswoman under attack by unstable neighbors. She had no idea she was walking into a perfectly constructed legal ambush. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, standing at the podium where my grandmother had once advocated for rural school funding. "I came to Pinedale seeking peace after military service, but I found a war in my own backyard." The 85-inch screen behind me came alive with my grandmother's original 1943 deed, showing her family's legitimate claim to land that predated any HOA by decades. The audience murmured as the timeline advanced through decades of peaceful mountain living to Bethany's arrival 3 years ago. Then the security footage began playing. Gasps echoed through the auditorium as people watched Bethany directing the trench excavation at dawn. Her voice crystal clear in the mountain air, Make sure it's deep enough that he can't drive out. That should teach him to mess with us." "That's not what happened," Bethany shouted from her seat, but her lawyer grabbed her arm, realizing she was making everything worse. The evidence presentation continued relentlessly. Financial documents displayed on the massive screen showed her real estate company's profits from forced sales, $340,000 in commissions from harassment-driven property transfers. The money trail connected every violation notice to eventual financial gain. But the smoking gun was the forged signature analysis. Handwriting expert Dr. Elizabeth Santos had prepared a devastating comparison showing my grandmother's authentic signature beside Bethany's crude forgery. The differences were so obvious that audience members started pointing and whispering before Dr. Santos even explained the technical analysis. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Santos testified with clinical precision, "these signatures were forged with 99.7% certainty. Whoever created these documents had no legal authority to incorporate this homeowners association." The room erupted in angry murmurs. 3 years of harassment, fines, and legal battles, all based on fraudulent paperwork that should never have been accepted by county officials. Harold's testimony brought the emotional stakes into focus. Standing at the podium with Margaret's memorial garden photos, his voice cracked as he described watching Bethany's crew destroy 30 years of carefully cultivated roses while he was buying groceries. "She didn't just kill flowers," Harold said, tears flowing freely. "She murdered my wife's memory for profit." Sarah Chen read a letter from her 8-year-old daughter. "Dear town people, please don't let the mean lady make us move away. I like my swing set and my friends, and I promise we're not bothering anyone." 12 other families testified about identical harassment campaigns. The pattern was undeniable. Systematic targeting of original landowners through fraudulent legal processes designed to force below-market property sales. Then I played the audio recording that ended Bethany's criminal career. "Once we eliminate these stubborn old families, we'll control $3 million in mineral rights." Bethany's voice filled the auditorium through professional sound equipment. "The energy company deal goes through next month. Then we relocate to Costa Rica with enough money to disappear forever." The collective gasp was audible on live television. Bethany's face went white as she realized her private confession was being broadcast to hundreds of thousands of viewers across Colorado. "This is all lies and manipulation," she screamed, standing up despite her lawyer's frantic attempts to silence her. This veteran used military training to wage psychological warfare against peaceful neighbors. But the security cameras had recorded her ordering my garden poisoned while claiming environmental protection. Audio surveillance had captured her bribing construction workers for false testimony. Financial records proved systematic fraud spanning multiple government agencies. FBI agent Henley stood up as Bethany attempted to leave the auditorium. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud government agencies, and racketeering under the RICO Act." The perp walk was broadcast live as Bethany was led out in handcuffs past cheering neighbors. Her final words were captured by every microphone in the room. "You people don't understand what you've done. I was improving this community." "The only thing you improved," I said into the microphone as police cars drove away, "was our understanding of how criminals disguise theft as civic duty." The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. County commissioners issued formal apologies. The HOA was dissolved by unanimous vote, replaced by a legitimate neighborhood association with rotating leadership and verified signatures. Justice had finally arrived in Pinedale, Colorado, and it came with handcuffs. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my grandmother's porch with morning coffee, listening to the sound of children playing freely in yards where they'd once been afraid to laugh too loudly. The trench is gone, filled with rich topsoil and planted with wildflowers that bloom brighter than any designer landscaping Bethany ever imagined. Justice moved swiftly once federal agencies took over. Bethany received 4 years in federal prison for mail fraud and racketeering. Her husband got 3 years for conspiracy and was permanently disbarred. Their construction company was dissolved. Equipment sold at auction to pay victim restitution totaling $1.7 million. The ripple effects reached further than anyone expected. Colorado passed Marcus's Law, requiring verified signatures and independent oversight for all HOA formations. 23 other communities reported similar fraud investigations after our story went viral, leading to the largest property rights reform movement in state history. My workshop business exploded with customers from 6 states who'd seen the news coverage and wanted to support someone who'd fought back against corruption. The irony wasn't lost on me. Bethany's attempts to destroy my livelihood had actually made it more successful than ever. But the real healing happened in our community gardens. Harold transformed his wife's memorial roses into a neighborhood gathering space where families share vegetables and stories every Sunday evening. The scent of Margaret's heirloom roses mixed with fresh herbs creates an atmosphere of peace that would have made my grandmother smile. Sarah Chen's children organized the Eleanor Whitfield Memorial Scholarship for rural students studying sustainable agriculture. $50,000 raised through GoFundMe after our story reached national attention. The first recipient is a local high school senior planning agricultural engineering studies, the kind of young person who will keep mountain communities thriving for generations. The mineral rights that nearly destroyed us became our salvation. Instead of selling to energy companies, our neighborhood voted to establish a permanent conservation easement protecting 500 acres of pristine mountain habitat. Wildlife biologists now use our area for native species research, bringing educational tourism that supports local businesses without destroying the character we'd fought to preserve. 3 families who'd planned to move away from Bethany's harassment decided to stay and help rebuild. Property values increased 15% due to national media attention, showcasing our strong community bonds. Turns out people want to live in neighborhoods where neighbors actually defend each other. The environmental restoration exceeded all expectations. Where Bethany's crew had poisoned my grandmother's garden, we planted heirloom varieties from seeds Eleanor had saved for decades. Those tomatoes descended from Irish immigrants now feed 5 families every summer, proving that some legacies can't be destroyed by corporate criminals. Netflix optioned our story for a limited series about property rights and community resistance. Jenny Morrison won a regional Emmy for investigative journalism. Tom's Denver Post expose triggered federal investigations into municipal corruption across 3 counties. But the sweetest victory is personal. I'm dating again, a local teacher who says she fell for a man brave enough to fight City Hall and win. My ex-wife called to apologize for doubting that moving to the mountains was the right choice. Even my teenage daughter admits that her old man might actually be kind of cool. Every morning, I check security cameras that now record only deer crossing the property line and neighbors walking dogs on newly peaceful streets. The diesel exhaust and fierce sweat have been replaced by pine needles and morning frost, the way mountain mornings should smell. Harold stops by twice a week for coffee and chess, sharing stories about Margaret while planning next season's garden expansion. Sarah's kids play in yards where their parents once worried about anonymous complaints and harassment campaigns. The new neighborhood association meets monthly in my grandmother's kitchen, rotating leadership and making decisions by actual consensus rather than manufactured authority. We've established emergency funds for families facing legitimate hardships and created maintenance crews to help elderly neighbors with property upkeep. Here's what I need from you. If you're dealing with HOA harassment or know someone trapped in similar situations, share this story and tag them. Sometimes people need to know they're not alone, and that fighting back is possible. And if this story helped you understand the importance of community defense against corruption, hit that subscribe button. There are more battles being fought in neighborhoods across America, and every story shared makes predators like Bethany think twice before targeting their next victim. Together, we're proving that ordinary neighbors can defeat extraordinary criminals when they stand united. The mountains are peaceful again, and my grandmother's legacy lives on.
Thank you for tuning in to HOA Stories, where neighbors stand up against HOA Karens and karma comes a-knocking. If you like this story, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more HOA tales and real-life neighborhood drama each week.